So I grew up as a Texans fan, so I identify with the struggle that a lot of NFL fans go through every single summer. I would say like 75% of NFL fan bases, which is if your team, no matter how good they are, if they're not seen as a preseason contender, pretty much nobody talks about them. And I don't blame sports media for doing that because, it's fun to talk about contenders and all the superpowers at the top. But, this is the NFL channel. There are 32 teams in the league, and most of those 32 are pretty darn good, even if nobody ever talks about them. So, again, me as a Texans fan, I identify with that struggle of going an entire summer craving just a morsel of coverage for this team that I love so much that I dedicate 17 weekends of my life to every single year, and I just feel like nobody's talking about them. So, again, here on this show, especially on this channel, the NFL channel, no fan base gets left behind here. We want to talk about everybody. So we have 4 teams today that I don't think are getting the national coverage that they deserve, that I think are a lot better than people probably think they are, maybe because they don't get a lot of national coverage. So we got the Panthers, we have the Patriots, we have the Seahawks, and we have the Raiders today. So if you're one of those 4 fan bases, congratulations. We're talking about you, and we're talking about you a lot. And if you're a fan base that still feels like you fall into that category that we didn't talk about today, leave a comment below because I want to do more of these. But for now, we're going to start with our first team on the docket today, the Carolina Panthers. They're better than you think. You'll have to forgive me, by the way, if you catch me looking down while I go through all these today, because I typed up 6 pages of notes to make sure I had all my receipts for everything that I say, and I did a lot of research for this episode, as one should when talking about these teams. And I know starting with the young quarterback receiver duo, Bryce Young and T-Mac, that's where a lot of people would go first. I'm going to save them for later because I want to talk about this defense first because that was the biggest problem by far last year. And a lot of their issues, which keep in mind they were 31st in terms of EPA per play allowed against the pass last year and 31st in terms of rushing EPA per play allowed. So they couldn't stop the pass and they couldn't stop the run. They were equal opportunity bad, so to speak. But the major theme for why they were so bad was A, missed tackles. Like this team really, really struggled to tackle. And they blitzed a lot because they didn't have the talent up front on the D-line to just win with 4. A lot of that was because Derrick Brown got hurt. And I always knew that Derrick Brown was a great player. Everybody knows Derrick Brown's a great player. I didn't understand, or rather give him enough credit for how important he was to that team until we saw the Panthers without Derrick Brown. Like, it was a disaster. It really was. And even the Panthers would admit that. Like, they were really, really reliant on him. I don't even think they realized how reliant they were on him until they didn't have him. And so, the entire goal of this offseason was to A, give Derrick Brown some help, and B, make it so that somebody else on the defensive line could make a play for this team besides him. Like, they invested a lot in terms of bringing in free agents to round out the interior rotation. They invested at the edge position in the draft. They brought in Nick Scorton and Princely Umanmielen. They did everything they could to improve this defensive line. And I'll kind of go through some stats to explain why and just how bad it was last year. We'll start with pass rush. I don't even want to say you could argue this was the worst pass rush in the league. Like, they really were the worst pass rush in the league, especially without DB. They were 32nd in defensive line pass rush win rate and 32nd in defensive line pressure rate. So they didn't win early in the rep and they didn't win late in the rep. They just never won ever. And because they couldn't, get any sort of pressure with their D line, they had to blitz a lot just to try to get to the quarterback. Didn't work super often, obviously, but it was kind of their only shot was to just blitz and blitz and blitz. And I'm not saying Ejiro Evero doesn't want to blitz, but he definitely blitzed way more than he was comfortable with just out of necessity. In fact, if you're looking at their third down blitz rate, they were at 47.2%, which was second highest in the NFL. They don't want to live in that territory. Like, they would like to be able to win with 4, hence all the investments they made on the D-line. And they also couldn't stop the run, again, because DB was out. But if you're looking at the structure of the defense, they played more light boxes than all but 3 other teams in the league. And a lot of that was just because of, they would start out in 2 high shells. They would rotate down into a single high look post snap. if you're looking at how they play cover three, which was their most common coverage, they didn't play cover three in the traditional way where, okay, we have a post safety deep, we have a strong safety. Ooh, hit my mic. We have a strong safety down low. It was, we're playing cover three by having two high safeties, and then either the left safety or the right safety is going to rotate down, and we're going to get into it post snap, which is something that a lot of teams do nowadays, but the Panthers do it more than literally everybody, actually. They have the most snaps in the league of running cover three, but from a two high shell pre-snap. That's just how they run cover three. And that also ties into their blitz rate too, because if you're running what's called a 3-3 fire zone, which is 3 deep, 3 under, rushing with 5, that's going to count as cover 3 as well. So that was a big reason why they played it that way too, is because they didn't want to tell you where the blitz was coming from. But all that to say, when you're starting out with 2 high safeties, even if you're getting into a 1 high look post snap, you're still playing with a light box. And when you're playing with a light box pre-snap and you don't have Derek Brown, it's kind of tough to stop the run. So, you have a safety, sure, he's coming down late, but he's coming from depth. Like, he's not coming from 5-6 yards back. He's coming from 12 to 15 yards back. So there's still going to be room to run. And if you don't have talent up front that can compensate for that and, almost like buy time for your safety to come from depth to fill the lane, like you're going to struggle. And, could Avero have adjusted how he stopped the run on early downs? Maybe, but I don't really think he had the talent to do anything about it. Like, okay, they could have just played a static single high look pre-snap that was also a single high look post-snap. Like, yeah, they could have done more of that. But then you kind of open yourselves up against the pass, because if you're just showing what you're in pre-snap, it's not hard for offenses to then just figure it out, like figure out what you're in and then just run cover 3 beaters all day. Like, at least Avero tried to keep him guessing of, am I in quarters? Am I in quarter, half? Am I in half, quarter? Are we in cover 2? Are we rotating down? Is it a blitz? Is it not a blitz? Like, he was trying to be ambiguous here. He just didn't have the dudes. And then, of course, we have missed tackle issue. They had the most missed tackles in the league on those post-snap rotations at 40. Because for whatever reason, when guys were coming from depth on these rotations, they were taking terrible angles, couldn't get anybody on the ground. Like 40 missed tackles just on rotations. Like, that's gross. That's really gross. So, and also a lot of those missed tackles were in the backfield too. Like, Avero would scheme up a blitz and get somebody in the backfield for a TFL, and then they would just miss. So I think it was really more of a personnel issue than a coordinator issue. As evidenced by the fact that what they did this offseason was really more changing personnel than coaching. And I think they really did a wonderful job. So I understand Panthers fans, they don't want to walk down memory lane here because it was hard to watch. But I want to explain for people that don't watch a lot of Panthers football just how bad it was. Couldn't rush the passer, couldn't tackle, couldn't stop the run. Were forced into playing coverage structures that they didn't want to be in all the time. Were forced to blitz more than they wanted to. Like, it was bad. So I think a lot of their additions this year maybe have alleviated that, and I think they did a really good job in free agency and the draft. Now, when it comes to offense, now we get to talk about Bryce Young and T-Mac. I think people don't realize how good Bryce Young was last year. And I'm not saying he was a top 10 quarterback overall, but if you're looking at how he handled pressure, he was one of the calmest quarterbacks under pressure in the league last year, which I think caught a lot of people by surprise, because when you were looking at him as a rookie, he really, really struggled under pressure. Like, it just looked like his downfield vision that he had at Alabama, and this was kind of his skill set at Alabama, was being calm under pressure. His vision didn't seem like it was still there anymore. His pocket presence, as far as, how he would maneuver himself in the pocket to give his offensive linemen favorable angles so they could kind of, reset in their block and win late in the rep. Like, the quarterback is just as responsible for his offensive line winning as the offensive linemen are, because if the quarterback is moving at all these weird angles and giving the defensive linemen, advantageous angles to reach him, then there's nothing the offensive line can do about it. So it's on the quarterback to put himself in a position where the offensive lineman is in between him and the rusher without using a visual aid. That's the best way I could describe it. Like, the best quarterbacks in the pocket make their offensive lines job easier. And that's what he did at Alabama. Didn't do it as a rookie, was really bad in the pocket, was really bad at finding and attacking space. And, that was where a lot of people were like, uh-oh, this might not work here. Especially, when comparing him to CJ Stroud, who had a great rookie year. Things were not trending well. All of a sudden, comes year 2, and Bama Bryce was back. He manipulated and managed the pocket extremely well. It was night and day compared to a year before. As far as reading and attacking space and, being an anticipatory thrower and throwing with touch and timing, orders of magnitude better than what he was as a rookie. It looked like Bama Bryce. All of the little things that he did well, having the eyes in the back of his head, it came back. And, I want to credit the Panthers coaching staff for not giving up on him and for coaxing out, what superpowers he does have. He's never going to be the biggest. He's never going to be the strongest and the fastest. I get it. He's not going to win with flash a whole lot, but he is going to win with subtlety. He is going to win with consistency, and he's going to win with, attack in the middle of the field. And he finally did that again last year. And the Panthers punched above their weight. Truly, they did. I know they didn't win a lot of games, but they took a couple really good teams to the wire last year. They were down in the mud with Philly and KC. And the roster wasn't even fully built yet. Again, we talked about all the defensive issues. If he had an actual defense last year, they might have ripped off a couple wins against top-tier teams. And that was, again, largely because Bryce Young looked so much better. Would it surprise you to know that under pressure last year, if you're looking at every single starting quarterback in the league, under pressure, he was the 11th highest rated quarterback out of everybody. Under pressure, he was 4th in big-time throws. He was only behind Darnold, Allen, and Joe Burrow. Bryce Young, 4th in the NFL, under pressure, big-time throws. He had a good stepping stone kind of year, and I'm really excited to see what he does year 2 with this staff. But I'm also really excited to see how he fits with Tetairoa McMillan, who I also think is a very misunderstood receiver. And the reason why I think he's misunderstood is because people kind of profile him as this Mike Evans type guy who's, okay, he's really big, jumps high, wins contested catches. Everybody puts him into that mold of just stick him outside and go win jump balls. That's not really what his superpowers are. Yes, he can do that, obviously. But to me, T-Mac's superpower is reading coverages post-snap, finding space against those zone coverages, and then getting yards after the catch. He was a deadly, deadly player over the middle last year, not necessarily mossing people, but just finding space. He is really, really good at reading coverages and just kind of being slithery and sneaky and tough to bring down. He's almost my comp for him when he was coming out was Eric Decker, prime Eric Decker. And I know a lot of people saw that as a slight, but if you looked at young prime Eric Decker, he was a dog. And he did all of that kind of stuff really well. He dominated the middle of the field. He was big. He had yards after catch ability. He caught everything. And I feel like Bryce Young, that is, who, identifies and attacks space over the middle better than a lot of other quarterbacks. That's the one thing he does really well. You pair that with a receiver who also finds and attacks space over the middle. I feel like that's a perfect fit. But overall, I think the Panthers are a really fun team. Their defense should be better. I was talking to my buddy who's in coaching. He recently was over there in Carolina and watched this defense practice, and he said it was night and day. They're going to be way better this year. The offense should be better. Quarterback should be better. Everything should be better. Are they going to make the playoffs? I have no idea. But they'll be fun. And I think at this point, Panthers fans would just like to be fun. Now, to team number 2. Let's talk about the New England Patriots. And of course, if I'm going to talk about the Patriots, I need to have somebody on who knows more about the Patriots than, let's just say, most people in the country. Taylor Kyles from CLNS. Taylor, first things first. Hello. Second things second. Efton Chisholm. Is he already the greatest Patriots receiver of all time?
I mean, the legend is growing, my friend. Even Drake May had to throw in, I think he's caught 50 passes. I asked Efton yesterday, have you dropped the ball to his knowledge, he hasn't dropped one. It's just the guy looks like a pro, and in a room of very young guys, he stands out anytime the ball goes his way. No wasted movement, ball doesn't move, and then it's instant yak mode. Like he's been fun to watch.
So between him and Pop Douglas, I mean, it doesn't hurt to have two capable slot receivers. But if you had to guess going into training camp, who's the lead dog in that race?
It's Pop.
Would it be Efton?
It's Pop.
It's still Pop?
By a country mile. Pop has looked very good this summer. And like he's always looked good, but it feels like this Josh McDaniels offense, he said it, he's like, I love this offense, I can't lie. The option routes, just the fact that he can get open no matter what the defense does, it fits his skill set. And I think he has 3 touchdowns in their mandatory mini camp. Like obviously no pads, not that serious, but I mean for anything you could do, I think Demario Douglas is at the top of the list of Patriots receivers, and then Efton Chisholm, he's a ways away, but he's definitely up there.
I remember a few years ago when Pop Douglas was at the Shrine Bowl that year. It was him and Zay Flowers were probably the two best receivers. Well, not probably. They were the two best receivers there. And Bill O'Brien had just got hired that day to be the Pats OC. Literally steps off the helicopter because the Patriots coaching staff was coaching those two guys. Steps off the helicopter, walks on the practice field. First thing he does is install Hoss-Y Juke. And he puts Pop in the slot, just running juke routes over and over and over again.
If Brett Coleman put it on a shirt, that's the first play you install.
I mean, they won a Super Bowl on Hoss-Y Juke by running it 5 times in a row, and I feel like that was literally the play they envisioned when they drafted him, was just your captain choice route now, and that's probably what it's going to be. So, I don't know. We'll see. It kind of feels like for the first time in a long time, the Patriots have a real receiving core, and I don't mean that they didn't have real NFL players. I mean that they have a well-built receiving core with a whole bunch of different guys that play defined roles and have spots we know that they're going to line up in, and they all have, unique skill sets that kind of fit together like a basketball team. How refreshing is it for you, as somebody who's at practice every single day, to look at a receiving core that looks like a well-built NFL group?
It is refreshing. I mean, now I will say Stephon Diggs isn't really doing anything full speed. Mac Hollins hasn't participated at all. He's basically been an assistant coach out there because McDaniels apparently has him in a ton of his cut-ups for what the guys are supposed to do. So you still have Kayshon Boutte at the X. So, it's not the best spot for him, I'll say that. And Kendrick Bourne's still doing his thing. That's a positive. I think you'll see more of what he can do when they put the pads on. You see the yak ability. But with Bourne and Demario Douglas, that's now that Bourne is another year off the ACL injury, so you can kind of project that he's going to be productive. It's a relief. Because for years it's been, guys aren't running routes to the right depth and guys are running into each other, and it feels like against zone coverage, no one knows where they're supposed to stop or how to slow down. And this year, separation's been an issue against a very talented secondary. It's not really a surprise necessarily, but you are at least seeing when things go well, it's functional, and it doesn't feel like what's going on here? There's a disconnect. I don't know where it's coming from, but something ain't right. And this year, you don't really have a lot of that.
Talk to me about Kyle Williams. Where does he kind of fit into this mix? Because he did a little bit of everything in college. Now, people think because of his size, he was more of an inside player. And, Patriots have 9 million slot receivers. What else is new? But he actually lined up outside more than inside when he was at Washington State. But he also did a whole bunch of, work in the screen game. They give him a bunch of jet sweeps, and he's almost like a tough role to pin down because he's just kind of good at everything. Where do you think he fits in?
I think where they want him is to be their better X receiver, their one-on-one beater. Because like I mentioned, Kayshon Boutte as a veteran is that guy right now. He works his butt off, blocks really well. He's good in the short to intermediate game, but he doesn't get a lot of separation, and he doesn't give you much downfield. That's not what you want to hear from an X. That's maybe something you tolerate from a Z. Now with Kyle Williams, doesn't have the prototypical size. That size doesn't exist on the Patriots. It's really hard to find those guys, so you kind of take what you can. Kyle Williams at least gives you a release package and a level of explosiveness and ball skills where he can win those one-on-one matchups. Now, he's had some targets against Christian Gonzalez, and in those matchups, you're like, yeah, he probably shouldn't live there because against those real freaky boundary corners, he's going to have some trouble because he is a smaller guy. But they've been moving him around. This isn't a guy who's going to be static, and to Josh McDaniels' offense, very rarely is anybody static. But from what I've seen, I can't disclose too much, but both Kyle Williams and Travion Henderson seem like they are not just going to be, third down back or X receiver. I think they're going to be weapons that are maximized because McDaniels actually knows what he's doing.
They were a pretty heavy 12 personnel team last year. I can't remember the exact rank that they were in terms of 12 personnel usage, but it was pretty far up there. I have to assume they're going to live in 11 more this year because they have more good receivers than tight ends. In that case, TreVeyon Henderson's pass pro ability is exponentially more valuable, right? Because most teams don't like to operate with just 5 guys in protection every single play. Like if you're going to get a sixth and you're using a tight end as a receiver, that 6th guy in protection is going to be a running back who's going to have to take on linebackers and DBs and the occasional edge rusher. How much pass pro work have you seen TreVeyon get so far? And would you say that he is probably in the lead to be the 3rd down back because of that?
Like, it's his job. And it's pretty clear that he's a 2nd-round pick, and those guys have high expectations. He's been right in the mix, and he does look good in pass pro. It doesn't feel like he's overwhelmed. And it's what you saw in his college tape. Like, it's not like he was just doing basic assignments. He's crossing the formation. Like, he has dual reads. There was a lot on his plate in college. Now, obviously, there is more in the pros, but it definitely has been a glaring weakness, and you haven't been able to see the physicality. That's why I swear, most of the questions I've asked Vrabel, he's just like, I can't really answer that because we're not doing a whole lot. But from what you can do from a running back, it's really just mental. Like, are you in the right spots where you could put somebody on their butt? And from what I've seen so far, he's definitely done that. And in terms of personnel, while we're talking about TreVeyon Henderson, I will say Josh McDaniels wants to be a 21 personnel team. He wants that fullback so they can run ISO, and then when you think they're running ISO, they want to throw right behind you. And then also, they want to be 2 tight ends when they can. I think they will have to lean into 11 if there's an injury to Hunter Henry or Austin Hooper. Those guys have some of the best chemistry with Drake May of anybody on this team, so I do think that Josh is going to want to lean into that. But he's also going to want to lean into, I think, pony personnel, because they got Ramondre Stevenson, who they've established is their top back. There's no question about that. If the ball security continues to be an issue, we'll talk about it, but I think it's pretty obvious he's their one. Then TreVeyon Henderson as your kind of 3rd down, also utility guy. And Antonio Gibson, a guy who was really good for them in limited reps. He made the most of them. Very explosive, can be that outside zone runner, but can also go out wide and play any receiver position you need him to. And sneaky name to watch out for, Lan Larison, one of the most productive players in college football. He's
my guy.
Again, for running backs, for what you can do in this time of year, he caught a wheel route in the red zone. Cam Riley was all over it, and he hauls it in. You see the tracking. He's gotten the comps to like Woodhead, Rex Burkhead. Like, there's a little shades of everything where he can run, he can be in blitz pickup or pass pro, he can catch the ball. Like, he's going to be fun. And I think as that 4th guy, there's just so much talent in that room. It's going to be hard to not find ways to get them on the field together.
I assume you guys asked Lan about his championship steer wrestling career at some point, right?
We haven't gotten him yet, but yes, everybody's going to ask about it because I think he said that like one of his parents told him, you can't play football forever, but you can do that forever. And I'm like, can you? Is that physically? Can you just be 60 years old bucking a Bronco? I don't know, but I'm very excited to ask him.
I hope he makes the roster. Yeah. Like, he's such a fun player. And I think he actually will, honestly. The real question is, special teams value, because they're not going to carry 4 running backs. This is an off-the-wall question, and we might not even have an answer for it yet. Kick returner. Who's going to be in the lead for that job? Because they have like 7 guys who can do it.
So it's been Antonio Gibson. He's been pretty solid at it. We've also seen a little bit more of Isaiah Bolden, which, like, praise the Lord, literally was the best kick returner in the nation his last year. I think he was at Jackson State, and we've barely seen him do it at the pro level. Like, he doesn't really have much of a role on game days, period, but when he does, it's really as a cornerback in garbage time. So we've finally seen him get in the mix, but it's not really clear who's going to win that job. If it was my choice, I'd probably say some combination of those guys. I think Lan's been in the mix. TreVeyon Henderson's doing it. Like you said, they've got a lot of players, but at this point, it doesn't really feel like there's necessarily a lead dog outside of Antonio Gibson, but that, again, is really by default.
I want to flip it over to the defense because, the lack of offensive production obviously got most of the headlines, negative headlines, I should say, about New England last year. Okay, they have a rookie quarterback who was in a bad situation. I get it. That's going to be the focus. But their defense was, let's say, not ideal, especially for a team that has the defensive heritage that the Patriots do. Now, they still tried to play that Patriots DNA, right? A ton of man coverage. I want to say they were like 3rd in man coverage rate last year, which is typically about where they are. they had a pretty high blitz rate, which is typically about where they are. But it was also out of necessity, right? Because their defensive line was 27th in pass rush win rate. They were 30th in pressure rate. So they couldn't really get pressure without blitzing whatsoever. I get it. Injuries were part of that as well. But when you have a secondary outside of Gonzo that struggles to cover man-to-man, you have a defensive line that without their top guys struggle to get pressure all by themselves. You have a recipe for a team that can't get off the field. And they were pretty terrible on third down. It's like 43% third down conversion rate allowed. And, that then led to Drake May getting fewer and fewer possessions. They were, bottom 7, I want to say, in the league, bottom 8 maybe in terms of possessions per game on offense. And so I have a whole bunch of questions about this defense, but my first is kind of how it relates to the offense. How important is it for Drake May going into year 2, beyond getting better protection, beyond getting better weapons, better play calling, all that kind of stuff? How important is it for him to just get better field position and to get more possessions per game? Because he was always backed up last year, and he only got the ball about 10 and a half times per game on average, which is really, really low.
And you see a lot of his biggest mistakes came in crunch time or when he had to just will the offense to success. And it's easy to see those turnover-worthy plays in a vacuum and think, oh, that's really ugly. And I'm not going to lie, at times they are. Like, Drake is capable of like a really aggressive brain fart every once in a while, but he doesn't do them nearly consistently enough where you're like, this is, going to be the death knell or anything. It's not that serious. But at the same time, you did see that he had to press. And not even just the supporting cast, but the positions he was being put in where the defense is giving up points. So if you go out there 2 drives in a row and you don't score, there's a good chance that you're going to be in a hole that everybody knows you are not equipped to get out of. And now with more bites at the apple where, okay, you get the good field position, you can settle for a field goal. You don't have to go for it on 4th down. Hopefully they lean into a skill set where the playbook's wide open in those situations. You have the coordinator and I think a play caller a head coach in Mike Vrabel who has the supporting cast where, if he likes the situation and his guys, he's going to go for it. But you don't have to do those things. He doesn't have to put up 30 points a game, make the superhero plays. He can play smart. And that's going to be huge because Josh McDaniels, he's going to put him in positions to succeed. Like, he's not going to call trick plays where he's throwing behind him when they're backed up near the goal line, end up getting a safety. That's not going to be happening. You're not going to see Josh leaning into concepts that he knows Drake's probably going to be a little more risky in. I just think the situation around Drake is going to allow him to be the cerebral quarterback he is. Where like in practices, he's not a guy who throws into tight windows or bad windows very often. And when he does a great job of understanding space and leverage and what windows he should attack and which ones he shouldn't. And if he doesn't have to force things, I think he can really, like we saw with Mahomes and Andy Reid, where he's like, first 2.5 seconds, it's my play. After that, do what you want. And Drake can really function in that system, knowing the offense is helping him and saying, I don't have to do everything, but if I do have to scramble or it's, I got to kind of make something happen out of nothing 1 or 2 times a game, yeah, sure. But the offense and defense are going to be there to support him so he can develop better habits.
So you're out there every single day at practice. Do you feel like that Patriots DNA on defense is still going to be there? Super blitz heavy, super heavy on man match coverages. If we get an opportunity to call zero, we're going to call it. Like, that Patriots style of defense. I know that Mike Vrabel never coached under Belichick, but again, he still was a part of a lot of defenses that played in that style as a player. And then throughout his coaching career, he's kind of made his own mark. But where do you feel identity-wise this defense is going to land in terms of the style of coverages they play, the style of blitzes they call, how many blitzes they call? Like, what are they now?
So I've asked Mike Vrabel about this because coming in, I'm thinking this is a guy that likes to play a lot of quarters. He likes a lot of simulated pressures, doesn't really lean into man coverage, but he did when he had the personnel to do it. And I think we all know, like, great defensive coordinators, most of them want to play man because if you have good man corners, it's just really hard to beat, right? Because guys aren't going to get open and there's not the windows of space that you have in zone where the better quarterbacks can just pick you apart. So when I asked Vrabel, are you going to lean more into the zone that you've done in the past or kind of go and lean into what your roster is saying you should do? He's like, if it's up to me, I want to play cat coverage. You got that cat, I got this cat. Like, he wants to play man coverage as well. And we know that is a tenet of those old Patriots defenses where I think philosophically this defense is going to be what it was under Bill. And Keon White has even alluded to that Mike Vrabel and his coaching staff are very similar in the way that they coach you and the fact that there's a level of accountability and detail that's inherent in everything they do. But the man is one of the only places where I think this defense is going to be the same. I think they're going to play more quarters than they have in the past. Typically, they only played quarters when they had like undersized guys where they couldn't play man coverage. They're like, you know what? We'll sit on a fence so we can just get downhill and try to force incompletions. This Vrabel system, I think we're going to see a lot more of that type of coverage, especially if you have the safeties. It's really good for run defense because you can get them into the fit as well. Still going to see a lot of cover 3. That's one of the staples for the Patriots. But again, more of those split safety looks and also an attacking defensive front. And this is something I know Christian Barmore is very excited about. Patriots have always been known as guys who are going to occupy space. And they'll blitz every once in a while, like when they had Jabril Peppers and Anthony Jennings on the edge. Impossible to run to their side because they're calling those blitzes constantly to make sure you can't get outside of them. But, you know, they're still trying to run a specific type of scheme where they're just occupying space and making a wall. Vrabel wants to make plays behind the line of scrimmage. He wants to be aggressive. He wants to rush with violence. Terrell Williams, the defensive coordinator, longtime defensive line coach, shares that mentality. So that's something I think fits this scheme much better and why when Milton Williams was on the market, when I thought he was going to Carolina, we were doing a live show. You could see my mood just completely shift because that's the guy where I think he opened up everything for this defensive front as a proven penetrator. Then they got him back. I'm like, all right, we're back cooking. And now Christian Barmore is healthy. Like Keon White, a guy who's much better when you just kind of let him do his thing than when you try to put him into a box. I just think they had the talent to be this kind of defense, and now they've reinforced it and added more depth where it's actually going to work, which is only going to make the back end better with Gonzo and now Carlton. I could go on and on. Like Harold Landry has been giddy, literally giddy, a grown man talking about this defense and its potential. So you're going to have to keep me in a lane because I could spiral.
Well, I kind of want to spiral about the D-line specifically, right? Because Milton, you know, when we looked at him and how he lined up in Philly, like he played 2-eye more than anything, which these days, and I kind of put out a tweet about this recently, how the rise of the use of a 2-eye technique at defensive tackle, for folks at home that don't know what that means, it means 2-eye is where you're lined up on the inside shoulder of the guard. Typically, a nose tackle or a shade nose is going to be lined up on the outside shoulder of the center. Very close, but not quite the same. And so a lot of teams have started to use 2-eyes as their quasi nose tackle instead of lining them up directly over the center or on the shoulder of the center. And that has massively impacted run schemes over the last 10 years or so, especially as nickel has become more and more prevalent. So Milton Williams played that 2-eye spot in Philly while, you know, Jalen Carter played a 3 technique, and he was really, really good at that. And so I look at this Pats D line, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm seeing Milton at 2-eye, I'm seeing Barmore at 3, I'm seeing Keon White in the essentially, hey, look at that tight end, go kill that guy role. And then, you know, Landry off the edge, you can just line him up as a wide 9 all day and not even care. Is that kind of how you also see this D line lining up with those guys in those roles?
So I think the defensive tackles are going to line up pretty much everywhere because they've got that versatility and coaches keep harping on it, so we're going to see them move around, and we have so far. I think it's actually going to be Barmore at the 2-eye because when he was healthy in 2023, that dude was dominant. And the stats showed it. Like he really flew under the radar. I thought he should have gotten some Pro Bowl votes or like some level of acknowledgement because what he was doing as a run defender and a pass rusher in a scheme where he was the only truth guy that you were afraid of on a snap-to-snap basis, who was getting all the extra attention, who was getting double teamed, and as someone who coming out of college, everyone's like, he can be elite. He just needs to be sturdier against the run and a little more consistent. It all came together, and he was an unstoppable force. Like quick passes, play action, screens. He's making plays on all of these. And I think knowing that he's a big guy who can handle that, he's really going to take on more of those interior duties with Milton Williams, I think, more as the 3 technique. But I also think Barmore, and I thought this was going to be Milton Williams at first, I think Barmore is going to be their Jeffrey Simmons, where when they go with like 4-3 over, he's going to be a defensive end. You're really going to see his flexibility all over the line because he can do it. Like he's got the moves where he's just so natural. If you stop his first move, the counter's coming before you know what even happened. He's just so skilled and also big, fast. Told me he studied Simmons. He studied Hayward, Chris Jones. Like everybody that fits his body type and has had production, he's been studying those guys. So I think he's really going to be more of that movable chess piece. And then Milton Williams, everyone made a big deal about how he was the only person that people had to worry about. And like, oh, he doesn't have Jalen Carter. What's going to happen? For my money, I like Christian Barmore better than Jalen Carter. I don't.
Right now or for the future? Or either?
I just think like as a player, maybe what we're going to see this season, because Barmore is just a wrecking ball, and there was nothing teams could do to stop him, and really his season flew under the radar. And also Keon White, man, like his stock is going to the moon. I said that last year, and I wasn't fully wrong, because he was almost unstoppable as an interior rusher. And the only time reason he slowed down late in the year was because teams realized, oh, he's the only guy who can get after the passer, and started literally double and triple teaming him at times. But he's got the skill set where he can line up anywhere. He's going to be more on the edge now because you got Milton Williams and Christian Barmore. He's still going to be inside where he's just no interior lineman, I think, can block him consistently. But because you have those guys, he's going to be more on the edge. And with Mike Smith, their outside linebackers coach, who's coached Tamba Ali's, Darius Smith, another guy on their staff with a great track record of defensive linemen, Keon White told me he doesn't feel like he's actually had a coach in previous seasons, which is crazy. Well, considering the Bill era, last year, not so much because that staff just never felt like they meshed very well. And Keon was vocal in saying, I want to be coached hard. And it kind of hinting towards the end of the year that like some changes needed to be made. And he wasn't even sure
and
like
they
if
were.
he was going to, yeah, exactly. But Mike Smith, like you can see it in warmups, like he's coaching up veterans. Like I saw him giving Anthony Jennings tips on pass rush technique because Mike Smith has given him a vision and saying like, when you're rushing, this is what the plan should be and this is your intent, which he never had before. And you can tell because he looks like a bull in a china shop when he's rushing. Like he's just off rip, just kind of trying to kill whoever's in front of him, but it doesn't look like there's much of a plan, although he got a little bit better last year. So Keon, Barmore, Milton, I think are going to lead this group with complimentary efforts from Harold Landry, who I think is much better, not much, but he's better than what people kind of paint him as. I don't think last year's Titan scheme did nearly enough to maximize what he does well. Kind of just put him in a contain role constantly, and that's why partially his pass rush win rate was so horrendous, because he's just kind of playing patty cake and trying to make sure that guys aren't getting out of the pocket. And Braden Swinson, Joshua Farmer, guys they got in the draft, and Calebon Chason, a guy who I wasn't sure was going to make the roster, has looked good so far and is heavily in the rotation. So this is the first time in a long time this front has the depth where if they lose a guy or two, it's not, oh God, the pass rush is going to just poof into thin air. They actually have a rotation where guys can stay fresh and potentially step up if anybody goes down.
So better weapons, better protection, better coaching, better D-line, ideally better coverage. That kind of checks every single box, right? And you know, a lot of Patriots fans are super hyped right now. I think a lot of fans around the NFL that haven't been paying attention to the Patriots don't really know what to expect from this team. For me personally, I think they're going to be fighting for a wild card spot. I know that sounds insane. I really do think that. But from a Patriots perspective, what is a successful season? Like what would have to happen for Patriots fans to look back on 2025 and say, all right, like we're okay with that. That's a stepping stone.
If we're just talking about numbers, I think if it's 9 wins, I say fine. I'll be disappointed. I think given their schedule and the fact that in most games, I think they will have an advantage at head coach, quarterback, and or offensive coordinator. And I think that's massive because they haven't had 2 of those together in a long time. So I think they should win at least 10 games. Again, just given there's a lot of teams that aren't really stable. They aren't either, but they at least have new faces that have track records of success. That's just like numbers wise. I think second place in the AFC East, which may have sounded crazy, you know, a few months ago, but now I don't think is really all that nuts. You got Justin Fields at quarterback for the Jets, who seems like a great dude. And I really do think the Jets have everything around him to be good, but I just don't really trust him to carry them to those heights. And I don't know what the Dolphins are doing, to be very honest. But not just the numbers. Like, I think if they're in the wild card, that's good. But like Mac Jones's rookie year, the numbers looked good, but that team got much worse down the stretch. Like, they hit the bye and then fell off a cliff. So I also think you want to see, like the goal was last year, consistent improvement and for them to be playing their best football by Thanksgiving and beyond, where you're like, okay, now if they don't want to be the team that you face in the wild card and teams are like, please, somebody knock them out in week 16 or 17, I'm begging you. And I think that's the recipe for success with this team.
Just don't be eliminated by Christmas.
Oh,
that's the goal,
nice.
Right?
That'd be nice.
That'd be nice for the first time in a while. All right. Thank you, Taylor. Appreciate you once again. I'm sure we'll have you back on during the season. Again, if you're a Patriots fan, I know this interview was long. So if you want this probably times 2 or 3 every single episode and you want the longest most in-depth, nitty-gritty Patriots content. Again, go find Taylor Kyles over at CLNS.
Thanks,
See you
buddy.
soon. Now, team number 3 here today is fascinating to me because they were right in the middle of the quarterback carousel, right in the middle of the coaching carousel, were a part of a series of major moves involving not just them, but 2 other teams, one of which we're going to talk about later. And yet all of these moves that they made to substantively, on paper, improve their team, we all just kind of talked about it for like 2 days and then forgot. But I'm not going to forget today. Like, I need to talk about the Seattle Seahawks. They did a lot this offseason, and I think they are not getting talked about enough, especially for a team that essentially had an offensive facelift in 1 year. A lot of names out the building, a lot of new names coming in. But before I dive into that Seahawks offense, just one quick reminder. If you want more ways to watch football this summer and this fall, over on NFL Plus, you get access to live, out-of-market preseason games. And in the regular season, you get live, local, and primetime games as well on your mobile device. And then on top of that, as if you could need any more, if you're an NFL RedZone fan, NFL Plus has NFL RedZone every single Sunday afternoon as well. So lots more ways to watch and enjoy football, which of course is what we're all here to do. Now, back to the Seahawks. Fascinating team. Not primarily because of the Darnold and Clint Kubiak thing, but that's a pretty darn big component of it. I want to dive into the fit between Darnold and Kubiak, who is the Seahawks' new offensive coordinator. And if that name sounds familiar, it's because he's the son of Gary Kubiak, who, if you're tracing the lineage of the Shanahan offense, which is everywhere these days, Gary Kubiak was arguably, other than Mike Shanahan himself, the biggest influential figure in that entire coaching tree, like even over Kyle. Kyle was Gary's offensive coordinator. He was his assistant for years before that. Like a lot of what Kyle does, honestly, is more Gary Kubiak-ish than even Mike Shanahan-ish. And I think Gary Kubiak maybe doesn't get a lot of the praise that he deserves among offensive minds in NFL history because his system and scheme echoes throughout the NFL even today. But that's besides the point. Clint Kubiak runs a lot of what his dad did. Kevin O'Connell runs a lot of what Gary Kubiak did by way of, the tree that O'Connell came out of, which was heavily influenced by Gary Kubiak. It's a lot of under center. It's a lot of deep play action passes. And Sam Darnold was exceptional at that last year. In fact, if you're looking at yards per attempt on play action passes from under center, so hard PA fakes, chucking it deep, Sam's yards per attempt was 9.8. That was 4th best in the NFL as far as under center play action. And this was not a small sample size, by the way. He had 151 attempts on the year just that were under center play action. That was 3rd, only behind Jared Goff and Matthew Stafford. 2, obviously, not so coincidentally, former Kevin O'Connell quarterbacks when looking at his work with the Rams. Now, as far as how this offense tends to take its shots deep down the field, they don't really do shots down the boundary. If you're looking at some offensive systems, they line their X receiver up out wide, they give them the one-on-one, and they try to throw a fade down the boundary, which is honestly kind of a low percentage ball. Like, unless you have a really dominant X receiver outside, it's tough to consistently connect on those. You look at Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams in their prime. That's like the main example I look at of dominant X receiver that can win vertically down the boundary. And then based on the leverage of the DB, the quarterback is either going to put it up the field or he's going to put it back shoulder. And you're basically just throwing up an alley-oop, right? The Gary Kubiak offense, which by extension the Kyle Shanahan offense, and by extension the Clint Kubiak offense, and by extension the Kevin O'Connell offense, everybody within this tree, they don't really rely on that much. Like, sure, it's nice if you have Andre Johnson, as an example, who could just go up and get it, but none of these coaches really prioritize those kinds of like iso ball deep shots. They really more prioritize higher percentage plays, i.e. plays that are more likely to result in a completion. Now, you have to do a little bit more work to scheme up the space to make those completions high probability, but that's what they do really well. So you see a lot of deep crossing routes. You see a lot of deep overs. You see post routes. You see post corners, corner posts, like stuff that has more of a lateral element to it, or a horizontal element to it, I should say, when it comes to the route, rather than just being pure vertical. And the reason for that is if you're running a route that is moving left to right or right to left while also gaining depth, and you're crossing the safety's face, if you're doing your job as a play caller and you're giving the backside corner, like let's say you're in cover 3, and you're giving the backside corner a reason to step down, and you also cross the safety's face, all of a sudden the entire deep third window is available to you. And that is a much higher probability of completion than trying to loft the ball deep into like a shoebox area one-on-one where you're trying to fit it over the corner but inside the sideline, and you have to hope that your receiver makes the catch. It's really more about creating uncontested deep catch situations where, you know, essentially you're just scheming a guy open, and it's just a lot easier on the quarterback. It's harder on the coach, but it's easier on the quarterback, and it's definitely easier on the receiver. And that's really, when I look at the deep passing game in this entire coaching tree, that is what they try to do. They try to cross the safety's face and make it so that you manipulate the coverage where there's no hang defender waiting where the receiver is going once they cross the safety's face. It's kind of the entire identity of the offense. And Sam Darnold is really, really good in that kind of offense. Clint Kubiak, you know, if you're looking at the work he did in New Orleans last year, really it was kind of the first 2 weeks before everybody got hurt. But if you're looking at the first 2 weeks in New Orleans, like that's what they did. And they scored, 45 points a game or something crazy like that. Like they lit everybody up in the first couple of weeks by going under center, running outside zone, having Derek Carr throw deep play action shots down the field. And it was magic. Like it looked like the 2009 Texans with Gary Kubiak as head coach and Kyle Shanahan as OC. So that's what they're going to do. And that's what they've been building to do. If you're looking at the makeup of this entire roster, you know, when they shipped off DK because, quite honestly, he doesn't necessarily fit what coaches in this coaching tree want for their X receiver. Not that DK is a bad X receiver, but if we're just talking about skill sets, I'm not so sure DK was a fit here. Like they want guys that are really good at running over the middle of the field, winning on crossing routes, winning on over routes. You know, obviously a lot of the modern interpretations of this offense is you have like these power slots like Cooper Kupp, who's now a Seahawk, that can motion in and then essentially be a fullback. Like that wasn't really a Gary Kubiak thing. Like when he wanted to run 2-back runs, he had Vontae Leach, who was a human Coke machine and like 260 pounds, and he would just use a fullback. A lot of the coaches these days, you know, they look at these receivers that are 215, 220, and they're like, it's close enough. We'll just use you as a fullback. So Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, like that is an archetype that is thriving, and the Seahawks are going to take advantage of that this year because they have JSN, they have Cooper Kupp. You know, they're building their receiving core to run this type of offense. They don't really need DK, who's more of an ISO ball guy. And even then, if you're looking at DK's contested catch rate last year, it was sub 30% off the top of my head. So even he wasn't like a great contested catcher if you want an ISO ball type of X. So he just didn't fit. And, you know, again, no shade to DK. He's a good player. He is not what this offense needed. So I look at the identity of the OC, the lineage of the OC. I look at the skill set of the quarterback. I look at the skill set of the receivers, and I see an offense coming together that makes sense. Like even offensive line wise, you know, they took Gray Zabel, who was one of the better wide zone blockers in this entire class at any offensive line position. He played tackle in college, but he's going to play interior for them. And he was excellent in wide zone. If you're looking at Haynes, who I believe was their 3rd round pick a year ago out of UConn, he was the best wide zone blocker in that class among interior offensive linemen. And they didn't really do that last year in Seattle. They were not a wide zone team. So in my head, I'm like, okay, well then why are you taking the guard that's good in wide zone if you're not going to run wide zone? But whatever. I'm not a coach. But now, like, they're going to be running an offense that fits their guards and fits their center and fits their tackles. Like, everything that just makes sense now. They have personnel that actually works in this offense. So I'm not really worried about the Seahawks when it comes to putting points on the board. I think they're going to be just fine. And when it comes to the defense, I didn't even get to Jalen Milroe. I totally forgot about Milroe. Like, you can put him in as a package player. Like, you want to run GT counter bash on 3rd and short like the Ravens do all the time. That's what Milroe's going to do for now, just to kind of sprinkle in the fun stuff. But the main identity of this offense is going to make a lot of sense. But defensively, very underrated defense in the back half of last season. They were really banged up in the first half of the season, and I think a lot of their overall numbers didn't look as good because of that. But, using my handy-dandy research powers, I was able to kind of do an early season and late season split here. So weeks 1 through 9, when they were banged up, they didn't really get their defensive line back and ready to go until then. Their D-line was 22nd in pass rush win rate, weeks 1 through 9. Weeks 10 plus, when everybody was back, for the most part, their D-line was 9th in pass rush win rate. That was higher than the Rams, by the way, who got a lot of deserved praise for how good their defensive line was at pass rushing. The Seahawks at the end of the year were even higher than them. So, there's still a very light and fast front, which is part of the reason why they were so good at rushing the passer. I wish they had a dedicated nose tackle. And even they wish they had a dedicated nose tackle. Like, they made Byron Murphy do it a lot last year because they have all these 3-technique bodies, and they don't really have a true nose tackle body. And so they put Byron Murphy. I think he played at like 310 last year, and they put him at nose because they're like, well, he's the best at doing it of the guys that we have, and it worked kinda. Like, they were average as a run defense. I actually have the number here, 15th. In run defense EPA per play. Again, without a true nose tackle, and they were still 15th, but they were 8th in pass defense EPA per play. So I think the lighter, faster front really helped them when it comes to stopping the pass. I just wish they had a true nose tackle so they could stop the run. I think even they wish they had a true nose tackle. The draft just didn't really fall their way to address that. Is what it is. Like, they're still going to be good on defense. Not a really high blitz rate. Only 35%. That was 21st. Their D-line was 2nd in pressures among all defensive line groups after 2.5 seconds, by the way. And it's really niche, kind of a nerdy stat, but it's also indicative of their strength as a D-line group. So if you're looking at pressures 2.5 seconds or later into the play, that is all effort, right? Like that you need a defensive line that is hungry to get pressure if they're going to do it after 2.5 seconds. And also you need coverage on the back end that can hold up for at least 2.5 seconds. But the fact that they were 2nd in late in the down pressures at 158, that was 42% of all of their D-line pressures. So not only were they high in pass rush win rate, which is really more of a metric of winning early in the down, they were high in pressures 2.5 seconds or later, which is a measure of how often they win late. So they're winning early, they're winning late. Once they got healthy, everything was good. So defensively, also, I think they're really underrated, which can you really be surprised? It's a Mike McDonald coach team. So all told, I know that was a lot of numbers there. All told, you have a Seattle Seahawks team with a new quarterback, a new OC, new receivers, ideally a resurgent offensive line, and a defense that in the back half of the year played really good football. Like, what's there not to love? I think everything fits really, really well. Like, this should be a playoff team, in my opinion. And they don't get talked about that way. Everybody talks about the Rams, as they should. The Rams are a juggernaut, in my opinion. Everybody looks at the Eagles. Everybody looks at basically the entirety of the NFC North. Nobody talks about Seattle. I don't get it. It's a good team. They really are. They're a really, really good team. Now, last team on the docket, the Las Vegas Raiders, they were the other side of the quarterback carousel because former Seahawks quarterback Geno Smith is now in Vegas with former Seahawks head coach Pete Carroll. And they too also have somehow flown under the radar, even though they have made arguably even more impactful overall moves than Seattle has this offseason. Because not only do they have a new quarterback and a new OC, they have a new head coach and a new running back and a new look offensive line and like a new everything. Like everything is new in Vegas, and they should be a hell of a lot better this year. And of course, when doing a deep dive on the Raiders, I have to bring in one of the most knowledgeable people about the Raiders in the entire country, Ted Nguyen, my friend from The Athletic. Also, by the way, co-hosts the Just Win podcast. If you're a Raiders fan that wants even more Raiders content, you can find that as well. Ted, first things first, how you doing? Second things second, I'm going to start you off with a softball question. What does a successful Raiders season in 2025 actually look like?
Yeah, I'm doing well. A little bit still in vacation mode, but it's the off season, so all good. And as far as successful season for the Raiders, I think I think they should be competing for a playoff spot with the moves they made. And I know it's an incomplete roster, but anytime you're bringing in Geno Smith, who I think is a borderline top 10 quarterback, and you're bringing in Pete Carroll, who we know has had success in this league and is getting up there in age, I think you have to try to compete for a playoff spot. And I think if they are in contention for a playoff spot in the last 2 weeks of the season, to me, that's a successful season, and that's a good building block to start this Pete Carroll era and John Spytek era off of.
Yeah, I want to start with Geno because obviously he's the biggest addition they made, non-coaching addition that they made this offseason. And there were some legitimate criticisms of Geno last year in Seattle. The red zone turnovers were not ideal. The numbers when he was under pressure were not ideal. But at the same time, if you're looking at his true drop back passes, non-screen, non-RPO, non-play action, just straight up drop back and rip it, of which there were a lot because they had to throw a lot last year, or rather chose to throw a lot last year. When he was kept clean in the pocket, on true drop back passes, he was like top 5 to 8 in pretty much every single metric you can think of, whether it's adjusted completion percentage, passer rating, TD to interception ratio, et cetera, et cetera. So I look at Geno, who's an older quarterback now. When he is kept clean, he can kind of just be the point guard that this team has needed for a long time. What level of quarterback does he need to be in order for this team to go back to the playoffs?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think, and a lot of guys that are quote-unquote film watchers love Geno Smith because if you watch his highlight throws and some of the difficult throws he makes, it's up there with some of the top quarterbacks in the league. Like you mentioned, the turnovers are a problem. But if you look at his turnover-worthy play rate for his career, it's usually towards the bottom. So I think last year was a bit of an outlier. And I think he was trying to force it a little bit. I mean, like you mentioned, the Seattle offensive line was one of the worst in the league. They gave up the most quick pressures under 2.5 seconds of any team in the league during Geno Smith's tenure as the Seahawks. So they just failed to protect him. I think if you watch some of his pressure throws, I think you actually have to, if you look at the numbers, they aren't kind, but if you actually watch him, how he mitigates pressure and deals with pressure, I actually came away more impressed. So I think for the Raiders, they have to be able to put together an average offensive line around Geno, which he hasn't had. He has had one of the worst pass blocking offensive lines in a long time, and he hasn't had a running game. And we'll talk about the Raiders running game in a little bit, but he just needs help on that front. But to me, he has to play like a top 10 quarterback, and it doesn't mean you have to be a top 10 quarterback, but if you have the right pieces around you, and we know that from watching guys like Baker Mayfield and Jared Goff, if you have the right help, you can play like a top 10 quarterback, even though, you may not be in that ranking as a pure passer, but to me, he can play like that. And I think the Raiders have some pieces around him. Obviously, they need a receiver to break out, but there are some pieces for him to play like a top 10 quarterback, and he has to, with the holes on the defensive roster. This offense has to be really good for this team to be competitive.
The connective tissue between, the Raiders finally having an effective pass game again and the Raiders finally having even an average run game again is going to be the offensive line. You mentioned it wasn't very good in Seattle last year, so Geno got lit up. Wasn't particularly amazing in Vegas last year. When it comes to run blocking, they were the 32nd ranked team in average yards before contact per carry, meaning how quickly the running back got hit. I want to say it was 1.0 yards flat. So the running back basically had no room to move ever. They have made some changes on the offensive line. JPJ is going over to play center. They made draft picks. They're going to figure out the right tackle situation. What are your early impressions of the new look offensive line? Like, what's the starting five that you expect? And if you had to guess, can they at least be average?
Yeah, I think if you're the Raiders, you're hoping for average. They didn't make any huge upgrades as far as free agent signings or during the draft day. They passed on adding Armand Membu in the draft for Ashton Genty. So they went with flash over substance, but I think they believe in some of the young pieces in his offensive line, like DJ Glaze, who was a third-round pick last year, played pretty well for them at right tackle. So you're hoping that he can develop into a plus starter, or at least hopefully an average starter at the right tackle position. Last year, they dealt with a ton of injuries. They never really got a footing towards the end of the year, and they did run the ball a little bit better in spurts towards the end of the year. But Colton Miller started the season injured. He was dealing with a shoulder injury, which really affected him. And then later on the season, he played well. JPJ, Jackson Powers Johnson, he was injured in the beginning of the season. It took a while for him to get inserted into the starting lineup as well. And I think JPJ has a chance to be a top 10 type of center. He has that type of potential. I think last year he was a little over aggressive at times, just trying to knock guys' heads off, and that led to some missed blocks. But I just think he has the physical ability, the mentality to be a really good center. So if you have Colton Miller, who I think is a very good tackle, not quite elite, and then you have Glaze, who can I think develop into at least an average tackle, and JPJ, who potentially could be a top 10 type of center. Those are three good pieces to have. Anchor your offensive line. And then the guard spots right now, they're hoping that Alex Kappa could bounce back from a pretty bad season with the Bengals, and maybe the scheme fit will help him a little bit more rather than being in the Bengals pass-heavy system. He was dealing with a ton of injuries last year as well. I think he's probably going to be the starting right guard. And there's a little bit of a position battle at the left guard position between Dylan Parham and Meredith. So we'll see who wins that out. I think Dylan Parham will end up winning that battle out. But I think just having a starting five into training camp and starting the season with five and building some chemistry is going to be important for this group that dealt with a ton of injuries as soon as the season started last year.
From a schematic perspective, obviously, whole new coaching staff, whole new philosophy, especially moving JPJ to center. I think that also kind of changes what kind of runs they might excel in. From a schematic perspective, what do you feel is going to be the entree in this run game? Are they going to be an outside zone heavy team? Are they going to more be inside zone? Are they going to be super man heavy like what we've seen Sean McVay transition to over the last few years? Are we just going to be pulling guys everywhere, like Greg Roman with the Chargers? Like, what do you feel is going to be the bread and butter for this run game based on A, what Ashton Genty's good at, and B, what we think this offensive line might be good at?
Yeah, I think we're going to see more of a mixed bag from Chip Kelly. Chip went more to a counter scheme at Ohio State when they went on the playoff run. They had a bunch of injuries on that offensive line. So they went to more of a gap scheme. They went to running a ton of counter, and that really kind of helped propel their offense into winning that championship. And I think we'll see some of that. I feel like this offensive line is probably a little bit better at gap scheme. So I think we'll see a mixed bag. I think we'll see some outside zone too. But it's difficult to kind of make a prediction on what Chip Kelly is going to run. We know it's not going to be this spread tempo offense that we saw when he was the Eagles offensive coordinator, but I think he just did a pretty good job of adjusting while he was at UCLA and Ohio State. So to me, I think it's going to be a mixed bag. I think we're going to see a lot of counter and a lot of pullers, like you said.
And then flipping over the defensive side of the ball, schematically, this team blitzed way more last year than I thought they would because they sunk a bunch of money into the defensive line. You would expect that they would try to win with 4. All of a sudden, 2024, they were 6th in overall blitz rate at 32.3%, which is fairly high. It's not like Brian Flores high, but fairly high, right? And also, by the way, they were number 1 in 0. Like they called 0 even more than the Vikings did, weirdly enough. Especially on third down. It was like 15% 0 rate on third down. So my 2 questions for you on that are, why did they blitz so much last year? And now that Pete Carroll's in town, do we think they're still going to blitz a lot this year?
Yeah, well, if you remember, Patrick Graham actually worked with Brian Flores at Miami and with the New England Patriots. So I think his DNA is man blitz, but he hasn't done that a lot since he's become a defensive coordinator, because he actually has been a bit of a chameleon schematically, because he's done a good job of adjusting to the talent he's had, and unfortunately he hasn't been able to work with a ton of talent. And I think last year he didn't intend to be very blitz heavy, but a ton of injuries on the defensive line. Malcolm Kuntz got injured before the season even started. Christian Wilkins got injured in the middle of the season, and he was a huge piece on this defensive line. And even Max Crosby, who never misses time, had to miss some games as well. So there was a ton of injuries on defensive line. They couldn't get home with 4. So I think he decided that he was just going to try to blitz and get back into kind of his New England DNA and try to create some pressure that way. I think this year, especially with Pete Carroll in the fold, I don't think they want to blitz as much. They want this defensive line to be the driving force for this defense. Max Crosby's back and healthy. Malcolm Kuntz is back and healthy. I think Tyree Wilson is going to take a step up. I don't know if he's going to be that elite pass rusher they visualized when they got in the first round, but I think he's going to be a useful player that could rush inside and out. But the big question is whether Christian Wilkins is going to be back, because he's had a setback with his foot injury. He's not participating in mini camp right now. So there's some question to whether he's going to be able to play in the beginning of the season. And I think worst case scenario is he might even play this season. We'll see. I mean, as a Raider fan or somebody that's covered the Raiders and watched the Raiders for a long time, I'm always ready for the worst case scenario. And I think there might be a chance, and it's just not a report, but I think there might be a chance if his foot is really that bad and it's not healing. And we know foot injuries are just tough to predict. That'd be the worst case scenario. But I think the Raiders are just hoping that he's able to get back in training camp and play at some point. But it's just kind of scary to hear that he's had all this time to heal and he's still not able to practice.
Well, hopefully the defense is healthier than they were last year. Hopefully the offense is healthier than they were last year. We still expect them to run a whole bunch of 12 personnel, because when you have their tight ends, obviously you should. We still expect them to probably lead the league and behind the Rams, I would say lead the league in using their wide receivers as insert blockers, because it's Chip Kelly and you drafted Jack Besh for a reason. Mm-hmm. This team, if nothing else, has an identity, in my opinion, which is toughness, hard-nosed football. We're going to play fast. We're going to play aggressive. Might not always go our way, but we're at least going to show up and we're going to do our thing, and it's on you to stop it, and good luck to you. So I'm really excited about this team. Again, I'm not sure if they're going to be anywhere near the top of the AFC, but they're definitely going to be fun. And I think for Raiders fans, just being fun would be nice.
Yeah, exactly. And the 12 personnel thing, I think, they obviously visualized that Michael Mayer was going to be that second tight end, but he missed the beginning of the season, and they just couldn't run the ball. If you can't run the ball, your 12 personnel is not going to work, because defense is going to play a lot of nickel and dime against your 12 personnel. You're not going to create the mismatches you want. So I think they're hoping that Michael Mayer is back and locked in, and they could run the ball a little better and create even more mismatches for those two. I think they are going to run a ton of 12, 13 personnel.
Yeah, I mean, if you can't run it out of 12 and 13, you just can't run it, period. So
exactly.
That kind of explains the entire 2024 Raiders in a nutshell. Like, even when they were in personnel groupings that should run the ball, they still couldn't do it. So at that point, you got nothing else. So hopefully it gets better this year. But thank you once again, Ted, for coming on. I appreciate you. Again, Raiders fans, you can find him at The Athletic or at the Just Win podcast. And hope to see you back soon.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, everybody. That'll wrap it up for me. This episode ended up probably being way longer than we originally anticipated. But if you're still here, you're probably not complaining about that. If you want more of this type of content, either on the NFL YouTube or NFL Plus or both, feel free to leave a comment below and let me know what you want us to talk about, because we might turn this into a weekly thing. Maybe you're the fan of a team that also doesn't get national media exposure a lot, and you want me to talk about why you're better than people give you credit for. Or maybe there's another topic on your mind you want us to hit. It's the middle of summer. There's no rules. We can talk about anything. So leave your comments down below. Give me your topic ideas, and maybe we'll be back pretty soon. Until then, I'm Brett Coleman, and I'll see you later.